Hi, I'm Curt Doty with RealmIQ. This is our podcast, RealmIQ session, where we talk about everything AI with AI leaders from around the world. Today's guest is Richard Merrett, coming to us from the UK. Rich is a visionary and pioneering expert in voice technology and generative AI, boasting an impressive track record of innovative projects, creative strategies, and education pieces. Welcome, Rich. Please elaborate on your career and what you're doing with AI.
Thank you, Kurt. Yeah, so I've been mainly involved in conversational AI, focusing, as you say, on voice technology. I started in voice technology in 2017. In a previous life, I was an educator, moved over to the tech world, and started with working with kind of Alexa and Google Assistant around the time that they first launched. Really looking at the time to try and work out how this kind of new conversational technology could be used to alleviate loneliness in care homes and for people with kind of degenerative brain disorders like dementia and the such.
Mm.
So I was looking to try and find ways to try and really kind of bring that technology to help people in various different ways. Uh, like created lots of experiments. I'm not kind of a medical expert, so I did lots of experiments, lots of kind of like different Alexa skills and Google actions for to just kind of test out different theories around kind of stickiness. So trying to build habits with these technologies around kind of how to deliver complex instructions over just voice, how the kind of the multimodal experience works, that kind of thing. And really just kind of looked at trying ways to kind of get people more comfortable in the environments that they find themselves in later life. Um, my career has expanded over quite, I know I've got involved quite a lot over the years. I created a YouTube channel reviewing Alexa skills with my children. It was called Echo Dad, where we got kind of real raw reactions from children because everyone at the time was saying children can't use this technology. And I wanted to prove that they could. So we did that. We had a meetup trying to kind of educate kind of just the local community in Cambridge and around there to try and understand how this technology was working and update people just who were interested in it. And then I moved over to a more kind of strategy role and kind of looking into how brands can really use this technology to kind of advance like engagement with their customers and kind of build their brand base a bit more. And was fortunate enough to work on several high-profile projects, including the Amazon Alexa themes, where I used my I'm going to use the word expertise in SSML, which is a very, very weird and very specific and very niche kind of thing that I love when I'm writing a book about. So SSML, for listeners that aren't aware, is speech synthesis markup language, essentially how to make robots sound a bit more human. And got to teach Alexa how to speak Na'vi, the language in Avatar, which was amazing fun. And then I moved more into the kind of generative AI space and looking more at how kind of the personas that I was working on with voice can be used in generative AI, and that's where I kind of used the book that I'm writing on SSML to take my persona away, and this was before custom GPTs, and use it to kind of create a persona of me to then write another book called It's Good to Be Bad, which is just about how characters in kids' children's stories aren't always as bad as they seem. The giant in the Jack and the Beanstalk, for example, not a bad guy. He was being robbed by Jack. So, how those kind of things work, but it writes in my style. And that's a lot of what I've been about over the last sort of 8, 9 years is about experimentation and working out how this technology can be used to kind of bolster what we've already got.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just got off of a think tank call with a bunch of AI experts, which was fascinating. We were talking about legacy AI and then that flashpoint when ChatGPT launched as being really the birth of Gen AI as a distinction, and then all the products that came after that, which are very different than Alexa and Siri, which have been around for years. And people don't realize the history of AI that it's actually been around for 50 years.
Yeah.
Or the term, was invented, certainly machine learning and all of its implications. So it's fascinating that you were involved in, some really high profile projects and uses and applications for that legacy AI. I come from, creative background, user experience design, branding, and marketing. And I do believe that voice is going to be the new interface, right? I mean,
Yes.
you must have a point of view on that, but do you
Oh,
agree?
absolutely. You know, voice, it's the first thing you ever learn. And it's also like thinking back to like the dementia stuff that I was kind of talking about a minute ago, like it's also the last thing you lose. So like voice is like it's the thing that's almost like a constant throughout your life, like in terms of being able to interface with something or someone. And it's a natural way. Like it doesn't take a lot of learning. You know, there's all sorts of kind of research out there about how like certainly older adults don't like to embrace new technology. However, with voice technology, the uptake was massive because there was no learning curve. They didn't have to learn how to swipe and what like the little cross meant and
Right.
you know what the burger means to kind of get more settings and stuff. You just use your instincts and do it that way. And you know, and thinking about children, like my kids in school don't learn about how to use a keyboard and mouse. Like that we kind of just take for granted that we can kind of use that because we've kind of grown up with that tech. Um, but they don't get instinctively taught how to use that. Now, there's an argument that parents should be doing that at home, but also like part of that is like they're not going to need to in 15, 20 years time. They're going to be able to like voice recognition is so much better than it was even at the kind of the advent of Siri and the advent of Alexa. And certainly much better than it was with IVR. But like it's already come on leaps and bounds, and the way that it communicates now, especially with that kind of, as you said, that flashpoint with Gen AI, um, there's now a lot more ways in which users can interact with voice and like can build out those experiences a lot more than you know for the last 7 years it's been quite kind of structured. We as designers have had to come up with the conversations and work out what people are going to say and kind of direct them in the right way and use our knowledge of interactions to be able to kind of design that effectively.
Yeah.
Now with Gen AI, there's an element of that can be left to the AI to come up with.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting point. And for me, like someone that is really involved in kind of the nuances around that kind of that conversation, those edge cases, and making it feel more relaxed and more engaging. Like how that works and how what's really interesting for me moving forward is how AI is going to handle things like SSML. How is AI going to be able to make the text that it is producing sound a way that is really kind of like pleasing on the ear. How is it going to be able to break up those sentences in a way that is not natural? We don't, putting pauses in a sentence, it takes listening to that sentence to be able to do. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that's going to be trained and how that kind of the output of that ends up. And if there is then going to be need for people to kind of skill up on things like that to be able to make those experiences a little bit more human.
Yeah. I use Murph.ai quite a bit, and some voices just don't work, and then you try the next, and whether it's an Australian accent or a British accent, somehow that avatar gets it, of
Yeah.
what you wanted to say or how you wanted a certain word pronounced. So it's a matter of playing with these platforms to get the results you want, but at the same time, uh, it is learning, right? And so it can only get better. Back to your keyboard comment. I remember taking typing class as a summer class many decades ago. When I was in seventh grade, I said I want to learn typing over the summer, get ahead of my fellow students in school. And you know who teaches typing now? It's
I was
like,
gonna say, yeah, they
what
don't
what
anymore.
what
No
is
way to do
I'm
that.
looking at my keyboard. What is QWERTY UP, right? It's like,
Yeah,
where do I put my fingers, and how do kids know that these days? But you're right, voice will certainly replace that. So I love your statement about it's the first thing you use and the last thing you use. But I will say for interface design, yes, you can give an audible, right?
yeah,
But then what's manifested, right? What is represented to you as the findings, there's still an interface there. So I think the hopes and dreams of UX designers is not gone, because there's
Absolutely
still
not.
a screen or a dimensionalized, spatial computing or dimensionalized interface that people be reacting to based on uh, uh, an audible or a prompt, audio prompt to get the results you want. So it's just it's an interesting and fascinating thing, but I definitely wanted to ask that, as a you as a futurist, where is this all going? Because I do talk with students and and teachers and professors, what is the future? It's like, what are we teaching kids in art school? Um, about,
Yeah, and
because
that's
they're the ones solving problems of how to communicate, right? Graphic design, UX design, uh, and service design. What is the future of those occupations? And I think it's those people with those types of brains are going to be the ones solving these problems, certainly.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I saw a talk not so long ago from a guy called Sol Albert, who is a professor at Loughborough University in the UK, and he was he was describing AI as a prosthetic limb. So so you think about, like when a para athlete gets a prosthetic limb, like it makes them a stronger athlete. It makes them a better athlete. It doesn't replace them. You can't just have the prosthetic limb running on its own. You have to
Right.
have the rest of the athlete there with their knowledge and their brain and their abilities and the way that their brains function to be able to actually produce the end result, which is a gold medal or whatever.
Right, right.
And I think it's the same. I think the analogy works quite well, certainly with kind of some of the creative and kind of educational pieces. Like it's a tool that can be used to really kind of bolster your arsenal. Like, you mentioned that, where do creatives go? I was having a conversation with someone the other day that was saying, entry level developers are almost it doesn't necessarily need to be a role anymore because the Gen AI can do that kind of entry level coding kind of stuff. But and I was saying then that their brains are required, the way that their brains work are required to do like the next level up and to be able to analyze that code and to be able to come up with the prompts to put that code in the first place.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, a lot of this is it's working out ways in which people can adapt and use this to kind of to their advantage. Like there is no I can create a lovely looking image on Midjourney, for example, but I have no artistic background, and like an actual artist will tell me where that's flawed. The cover of the book I mentioned earlier, I did that with Bing AI. Like the entire book is AI generated, apart from the introduction, which I wrote on an aeroplane. Because no better place to write than when you're trapped in a box.
Mhm.
But you know, I then spoke to some artists like later on, some artist friends. They were like, "Well, I would never have done it like that. I'd never have done it like this. You should have shifted this and that and moved it around." And it's their brains that and the way that their artistic brains work that are still necessary in society as a whole.
Thank you. This is a gripe of mine, because I come from classically trained art school. I was illustrator for many years, then became a designer. And so there's this thing that I refer to as the aesthete, meaning you have it or you don't. If you have it, you go into art school and you learn how to use it, right? And I call it also, being an art snob, being qualified to actually say, that kind of sucks,
Mm.
or critique something, have a critical eye. But it's based on that aesthete, which is, Robert Henri called it the art spirit. It's about this notion that there's a soul there. You could call it a gift from God, but there is something there. And I think, moving forward, it's those people with the aesthete that needs to drive not only the innovations that are happening in Gen AI, but we need to get past the junk that's being manifested, because right now people are saying, look, Ma, no hands. Like, look, Ma, I did a painting in Midjourney. And it's like, okay, but for what purpose? Uh,
Mm.
so design with purpose, play with purpose, create art with purpose. But just to put it up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I was playing around with, Leonardo. Look what I made. And
Mm.
it's like, okay, great. But there's some of us who are using these tools to empower us to do larger things like solve client problems, solve problems for ourselves in our own workflows, our own creative workflows, and we're doing it quietly, because a lot of it is not necessarily sexy, right? If I'm
Mm.
using ChatGPT to do persona development for a brand that I'm working on, well, it's not really sexy, right? It's not as sexy as the flying rainbow pig in the neopunk cloudscape,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
right? But I'm using it. It's empowering me. It's like I'm able to do my work more effectively, and more accurately and better. And so I'm just hoping that, you know, this this flood of playing superfluously will subside, and real creatives can, um, I don't know, somehow be celebrated a little more than everyone, liking the flying rainbow pig on the
Absolutely.
internet,
And
right?
it has to happen. Like it will come that way. And it will come full circle because at the moment it's all very kind of new and shiny and like, oh, here I've just been sitting in my home office and now I can create this rainbow pig. So people are excited by that. And I feel in a very similar way around kind of SSML. Like
Well,
it's an
yeah,
architecture, right? It's sculpting the speech and sculpting the way that the output. And like there is nothing that AI will be able to assist with that, but there's an element of that kind of that skill and that kind of attention to detail that an AI is not always going to pick up because it takes years of experience and it takes kind of having sat and listened to, for example, when I was teaching Alexa to speak Navi, taking every single syllable of a sound that Paul Frumer, the guy that invented the language, had like listed out for like how to say hello in Navi and listening to every single syllable and making sure that every single sound was then replicated in some way. It takes that level of skill and that level of attention to detail, which our students obviously have as well, with like, having years of study, that is what is going to produce a better quality kind of output. And it may be that they use it to help them, but it's never
right.
their ability.
Authentic. I think this word comes up all the time. Authentic. And, how do you make
Mm,
AI authentic? It's hard enough to be a human being and be authentic, right? Because you, as a human being, you can sound insincere, right, in a
yeah.
response, right, or callous, or phony, right? So how are you then training, even with voice, authenticity? So when you believe that a human is actually speaking to you, I mean,
Mm,
that's the goal, right?
yeah, absolutely.
And that it's believable, it's authentic, and I trust it in a customer service environment. It's like I'm, finally, oh, thank God, I'm finally talking with a human. It's like, actually, no, you're not. But
Yeah. And
okay,
then and then there's the whole ethical question about whether it should like say that you're not talking with a human right now. Like I remember probably 5 years ago now when Google Duplex first was kind of announced and some like on stage we were trying to make a phone call with a hairdresser's, I think it was, to book an appointment. And on the other end of the phone was Google Duplex that was doing the kind of the back and forth and making the appointment and it sounded quite human at the time. And the question then is, do you at any point let them know that you're speaking to a robot, or do you kind of stick with the pretense that you're speaking to another human being and making that appointment? And that there's a whole ethical question around that, which is an interesting one. And with different, different legislation that's coming around the corner, with the EU AI Act, with whatever's going to happen in the States with whatever's happening in Japan, Australia, what the UK decides to do, around kind of with written content, being able to kind of say this is created with generative AI, and with imagery, this is created with generative AI. How do you do that with a vocal experience without interrupting that experience?
Right.
And I think that's an interesting question that is yet to be
No,
answered.
and yeah, what are the guidelines? I
Yeah.
think there should always be a legal disclaimer, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that gets you off the hook for representation. But I think being authentic is the goal. I think having a sense of humor, that's a very human thing. And so
It
tell me,
is.
what do you have, can these things have a sense of humor and be on the spot with some jolly response that's
Well, this is
humorous and
it, right?
witty?
There's sense of humor is also nuanced, right? Like, so what I find funny, someone else might not find
Right.
funny. But the AI can't judge the room. One of the biggest things that I hated after kind of speaking on stages and like on conference circuits when the pandemic came along was then talking to people like a conference like on a
Like we're
Zoom
talking.
like we're talking now. But I mean, I can see your face,
Yeah.
which is great because I can see your reactions. But when you're talking on a Zoom to like 50, 200 people and you can't see any of their responses and their reactions, like, did that joke land? I don't know. Like, am I still funny on Zoom? Am I like I was funny on a stage? I'm not funny on Zoom. What's this about?
Yeah.
So like, I think there's an element of with AI, like it can't judge the room. So there's that element of it. Now, I mean, what I will say, I mean, apparently it recognizes humor. So going back to the kind of the It's Good to Be Bad book that I co-wrote with ChatGPT, which I'm very clear about. I'm a co-writer. Um, it's it took my SSML book, which has elements of humor involved in it. It's written with my personality. It's like
Yeah.
it's a factual book, but it's a bit fun because like we only live once, right?
Yeah.
So and when you get it to describe my persona, it does say, oh, you use kind of witty and humorous responses to and pop culture references and all this sort of thing. And it tries to then replicate that in the book. Now, some of them are funny-ish. I
Right.
probably wouldn't make some of those jokes,
Right.
but I think it
Some of them
tries.
become dad jokes, right?
I mean, I love a dad joke, but yeah, I mean, I've built a bit of a reputation on dad jokes.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, so they are, and they're not clever jokes. They are, like you say, they're dad jokes. They're like obvious jokes to make, as opposed to kind of the cleverer, long running format jokes that tend to need a bit more of a human
Yeah.
interface.
So I guess humorists and comedians are, not threatened at this point.
I don't think so, not yet. Unless they are one-liner comics that just come up with like joke after joke after joke, trying to
Yeah.
set the world record for the most amount of jokes in 60
Like
minutes.
take my wife, please, right?
Yeah, those kind of jokes.
Uh-huh. Rodney Dangerfield. Okay. So big question. Where do you see this going in terms of not only voice and the things that you've been working on, but uh, cultural implications, safety implications, cybersecurity implications? How do we control that? How do we innovate for good? Do we focus on the good and not the bad? What's your philosophy
I
around
mean,
all that?
I think we have to focus on the good and not the bad. There is always going to be a bad egg. Like someone is going to try and abuse the technology. It's part of life. There is always that kind of person. But there's a really interesting book by a guy called Rutger Bergman called Humankind, like I said, History of Happiness or something like that. And it's about how good people are. And inherently, humans are good. And inherently, we try and do good. And 90% of the people that I talk to, admittedly, I'm not going to be talking to nefarious people too often, are trying to do good with the tech.
Hmm.
So I think I understand governments kind of nervousness around this.
Mhm.
And I understand kind of the general populace and the mainstream media's nervousness around this, because certainly in terms of newspapers and article writing, it can do quite a lot of that for people given the right source material and stuff. So, and they're the people that write the narrative at the end of the day. So I understand that. However, I do think that having a knee-jerk reaction to something that has the potential to do good is a dangerous move. And regulating too hard too quickly is
Yeah.
also a dangerous move. So I think there should be the ability to innovate. People should be allowed to innovate and innovate in safe spaces as well, but not put, but allow that in and allow that innovation to happen. So one of the beautiful things about voice technology was Amazon and Google, Apple less so, because Apple is very ring fenced and it's very privacy focused and stuff. So let's leave Apple to one side. But Amazon and Google allowed like bedroom developers to create a wealth of experiences, and they provided the tools for them to do so. And that meant that a lot of mistakes were made early by people just sat in their offices, in their basements, whatever. And it also meant that best practices were able to come out quicker. So you think about like voice technology in terms of Alexa, it's been around for, I think she's just had her 9th birthday, I think. 8th or 9th birthday? 9th. So like not been around for very long, less than a decade, and yet best practices are out there about how to design for voice technology
Yeah.
in a kind of that's in an environment that's in the home. It's not like an IVR type experience. So allowing people to have that freedom to be able to create and to be able to experiment and to innovate is really important. And I think it's almost the responsibility of those big tech firms. So like your Amazons and your Googles again, but also your open AIs, your Facebooks, which I think Meta, sorry, which I think Meta is doing by open sourcing everything. Allowing freedom for people to experiment and develop to help create, like, understand what best practices should be around that.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's, having that ability for people to have those environments and call each other out on it, like, is also important. Like,
Yeah.
social
I think the development community, even within a big tech organization, OpenAI didn't really release much for 5 years.
exactly.
But they were working all this shit out, right? And I just on this think tank I was just on, one of the gentlemen had a tour of Neuralink and was talking about the experiments they're doing with monkeys and implanting chips into their brains and getting so we're not going to be replaced by robots evidently, but monkeys.
Maybe monkeys, yeah.
Who knew, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so this experimentation and working out things happening in closed environments is research or R&D. I think R&D can and should go on without regulation. It's only when one, you're going to be testing on humans, and two, when you go public with some release of a beta, that regulation has to set in, because they're going to say, well, did you consider these things, the implications of these things? But I think in the spirit of innovation, that is not hindered by regulations until it goes public in some form.
Yeah. And
Right.
and I think as well, like, as a community of like AI kind of developers, evangelists, strategists, like whatever you want to kind of put the umbrella term as, there's a social responsibility there for companies to put their, if a company sees that another company is doing something that is like ethically dubious, to kind of approach them in a friendly manner, obviously. But this is risky. Like, we've got to think about the general rules, because this is moving so fast as well. And that's, I think, something that's really interesting about this. So I did a thing at my last company where I did a thing called Newsday Tuesday. So I did the news every Tuesday or every other Tuesday. I did a summary of like the news in kind of conversational AI for the company, so that everyone else could keep abreast of it. It also meant that I wrote the newsletter and I kept abreast of everything as well, which was always handy. But everything moves so quickly that, I mean, just look at OpenAI a couple of weeks ago. They had what, 4 CEOs in the space of 4 days, and 2 of them were the same one. Everything can move so quick that it's very, very difficult to keep up, and something can happen like that you don't realize is that flash in the pan, and you don't realize is going to be as groundbreaking as it is, or as controversial as it could become. So being aware of everything and having a social responsibility to call people out if something is that, I think, is also important, and at the end of the day makes us better humans as well.
Yeah, I think social responsibility through AI advocacy and evangelism, because as we've seen with our country here across the pond, these government people are idiots when it comes to actually what they understand about the internet and social
It's not
media
just your
and
side of the
technology.
Atlantic. That works outside of the Atlantic as well.
Okay, yeah, well, I'm not really watching parliamentary sessions too much, although they are much more entertaining than our Congress, certainly. But you're right. I think there needs to be an empowered group of advocates that are advising governments, and they are brought into the White House here. I don't know how they picked the people. When I see Time Magazine's cover of the most important people in AI, it's like, well, those aren't the people I'm talking to and that I follow. And so there's a weird populism that is influencing who influences government. And I'm not sure what the mechanisms are to enable deeper and better discussion, other than doing podcasts like this. This is why I'm doing these types of shows, and I choose not to do YouTube videos showing me working on Mid-Journey and look what I did. There's so many better people at doing that, and the market's flooded with that. But I think what's really important are these discussions like you and I are having, and getting those out in the world, and exposing people to the thought leaders who are doing things, with the technology and have been in it a while. I think you're a great example of that. And, your point of view, I think is very important as a contributor to this larger discussion through a conversation like this.
Oh, I appreciate that. But yeah, I think you're right. It is important to have those conversations and have those conversations out there, because like you say, there's lots of cheat sheets on Twitter, there's lots of X, there's lots of people doing videos on how-tos and the way that all this can be done. But these conversations that we're having now are really important. There used to be something in the voice world called the Open Voice Network. That was a group of a lot of us that were working in the voice technology industry, working with Alexa, working with Google, working with Siri, and we kind of came together and split off into splinter groups to work out, some rules around that we should potentially put forward around ethics. And I was part of the education steering team to work out how voice tech could be used in classrooms in the United States. And there was various other groups. There's a group around strategy. There was a few others, but it was people that were working in that environment, having discussions, working out what was right and what was wrong, like almost like from an ethics point of view, and trying to hold some of the big companies to account if they were doing something that was a little bit dubious. Mm-hmm. So having those types of groups as well is also really important as we move forward, and especially in a world that is so interconnected. I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that it doesn't matter where in the world you are, we can find a way to convert. I mean, obviously we're two sides of the Atlantic Ocean right now, but wherever in the world you are, we can find ways to converse and join up and use our brains for the better. And I think that's really important, to get those viewpoints from from the US, from the UK, from from Germany, Italy, Spain, but also from those kind of those outlying countries, sort of like the Latin American countries. How are they viewing it? Because it's also relevant to them. It's not fair for the Western world of kind of middle-aged white men to come up with the rules. We should be kind of focusing on like everywhere else in the world as well and giving other people a say. And I think it's super important, and it's possible now, which is the thing when it doesn't happen, which is irritating.
Yeah. And God help us what's happening in China, right? We just don't know.
Yeah.
So listen, we're entering our end of our half an hour here. I wanted to give you an opportunity to plug anything, your new book or whatever, so that people know, one, how to reach you and talk to you, but also how to buy things you're working on. Or
Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, so I mean, if anyone wants to reach out, I mean, I am on X at Rich Merrett 815. That's MERRETT. No one ever spells it right, which is great fun in shops. I'm also on LinkedIn. Please feel free to reach out. I do have my book that is currently out, which is called "It's Good to Be Bad." It is available on Amazon in all the best regions that you can actually upload it onto Amazon. So that's available there. And look out for Voice Magic, Harnessing the Power of SSML, which will be coming soon to all good retailers.
awesome. Well, listen, thanks, Rich, and thanks for tuning in, all you listeners and watchers, and catch more of our RealmIQ sessions on your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeart Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please follow and subscribe. Thanks, Rich. Take care.
Thank you, Curt.
Thanks, everyone. You can now catch RealmIQ sessions on your favorite podcast channels, including Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and iHeart Podcasts. Or listen to the full sessions at curtdoty.co/RealmIQ. If your company is interested in reaching an audience of AI professionals and decision makers to promote your event or product, we do have sponsorship opportunities. If you enjoy these discussions on AI, please push that subscribe button below. I'll see you in the next video.
RealmIQ. Book your corporate AI workshop today.
Subscribe to our Media Slam newsletter and learn more about the intersection of design, content, and technology.
CurtDoty.co. Branding, marketing, and product development.